นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. When I was a young monk, just ordained, not very long, a fellow monastic was ordaining as a monk, a novice was ordaining as a monk, and a few of us went with him for the ordination ceremony, which in those days was held at Wat Pah Pong, Ajahn Chah's monastery. Even though he was very ill, senior monk Lumpur Mahaamon, who was one of his senior disciples, would come over and lead the ordination ceremony as a preceptor. And then after the ceremony, he suggested we go and see a visiting monk who was staying in a very quiet, out-of-the-way little branch monastery where there were just a few monks staying in a forest, maybe 30 kilometers away. So we went there on our way back to our monastery, stopped in and went to visit a very small little hut at the back of the monastery, bamboo hut with grass roof, no electricity, no toilet or running water. And there was a very old, frail-looking monk, probably in his mid-70s, just sitting there on the bamboo. He had a simple mat and a few robes neatly folded, and a kettle and a cup and a candle and a box of matches, and that was about it. So he's living very simply, in very humble circumstances. But we went to pay respects, and turned out he was a very senior monk from a big temple in Bangkok. He had very high-ranking ecclesiastical titles and was considered to be a great teacher of a scholar monk and teacher of the Buddhist texts. But he's now living very simply in this small forest monastery in Ubon province. And he explained that he had spent all his life as a monk studying the texts and then becoming a teacher of the texts to other monks, and also because he was very learned and knowledgeable, he gained a lot of, or served the Sangha as an administrator, and then gradually gained more responsibility as an administrator of the Sangha as well as a teacher of the scriptures. But he explained all his life as a monk he'd contemplated the Dhamma that he'd learned and then would teach others, but he always wanted to practice more. And he always felt that over the 55 years he'd been a monk, he'd been contemplating the Dhamma, thinking about it, remembering it, understanding it, but he felt he hadn't realized the Dhamma yet. And so in the last years of his life, what he wanted to do was set aside all his administrative duties and teaching duties, give them over to other younger, fitter monks, which he'd done. And then he came up to this forest monastery to practice and, he said, to practice and realize the Dhamma. That was his goal. He said that goal had never changed since the day he ordained, but he felt he'd sort of been caught up with learning, studying, teaching, administrating, and now he felt it was time to set aside as much as he could of his duties and practice the Dhamma, meaning put more effort into, particularly into the development of meditation, sitting, walking, living very simply, eating one meal a day in the forest, and now putting what he had learnt into practice to purify his mind and realize the Dhamma, as opposed to just remember the Dhamma. So for us it was very inspiring, because we'd just come from an ordination, and this was somebody who spent their whole life in the robes, and even though he felt he hadn't realized the Dhamma yet, he was still fully committed to that goal and was setting aside a lot to realize that goal, because he, as a abbot of a big temple in Bangkok, he had many students and lay disciples, monk students and lay disciples who followed him, looked after him, followed him, were under his guidance. He had duties, responsibilities to the greater Sangha, a role in running the whole Sangha administration of Thailand. He knew, lots of people, important people, all kinds of different people. And he was giving all that up to come and practice, partly out of faith in Ajahn Chah and his teachings and way of practice, partly out of his own desire to realize the Dhamma. So it was a good lesson for us junior monks. And he pointed out the simple fact that the Buddha taught what we call the pariyatti, which is like the theoretical teachings, what we now have in the scriptures and what we hear from talks, read and listen to. But the pariyatti Dhamma, the teachings, are to be practiced, so that's what we call the patipatti Dhamma. Patipatti means practice, putting them into practice. They're to be practiced. And this is for pativaita, which is realization, to realize the Dhamma. So he was explaining that and speaking very much from first-hand experience. And he said, we have to keep coming back to the practice, even though we have other duties and responsibilities, even as monks. We have to come back to the practice as long as we haven't realized the Dhamma. And he seemed to have a very good attitude for somebody so old and already very wise and experienced in teaching and practicing the Dhamma, but he seemed to have that unusual wisdom of understanding that he didn't know everything and he hadn't realized everything, which is another form of wisdom, you could say, understanding what you know but also understanding what you don't know. And one of the things we're dealing with as we practice is we're dealing with our own avijja or delusion, and part of that, it brings up the result of avijja is it brings up craving, clinging to a sense of self, and that sense of self, the modern word is ego. It can be a great obstacle to realizing Dhamma, because our conditioning and the pressure and the way our society and culture is, we always like to present the image to others and maybe even to ourselves that we know, we are in charge, we are confident. And of course, if you want to learn more, that can be an obstacle, because it's like you don't want to receive anything else because you don't have the right attitude yet to learn and practice and realize the Dhamma, because you feel you already know. and you present that image to everyone. I know. If you're an adult in society, we like to express our opinions, be confident, and if you're going out to work, it's not good for business to say, I don't know, is it? You have to always present the image that you do know. And of course, you may know many things, so it's not always completely wrong, but it also is a difficult one to adjust between presenting this image of I know, but then also admitting that you don't know some things and opening up to learn new things. Especially as we get older, we sometimes get complacent or become stubborn, or sometimes just kind of tired and not willing or interested to learn more in life. And these are, natural experiences, but they can become an obstacle to learning more Dhamma. One time Luang Por Plien came here and he had a teaching based on he remembered one of his teachers who was called Luang Por Du, and Luang Por Du was a very creative and skilled Dhamma teacher, and he had one student, a monk, who thought he knew it all. He'd read a lot, learnt a lot, and Luang Por Du, who was considered to be enlightened, recognized that this monk was stuck in his practice because he thought he knew so much. He wasn't willing to come back and look at the impermanence of what he knew and the places where he may still be attaching to this sense of self, the ego, and this was a block. So he was trying to teach him, and the monk wouldn't, recognize that he needed to learn and practice more. And he was always presenting this image, I know the Dhamma already. So he thought up a good way to teach him. He said, get a bucket. Because this monk was his student still, even though he felt he knew it all. He said, get a bucket, and then get some of those chippings, the kind of chippings you use to mix with sand and cement and make concrete. And monasteries often have piles of these things around because there are little work projects going on. So he said, bring me a bucket full of chippings. So the monk did that. He bought the bucket, it was full of chippings to the brim. He put it down, and Luang Por Du said, is this bucket full? And the monk said, yeah, it's full of chippings. So Luang Por Du said, well, go and get some sand. Got some sand, and now he said, pour the sand into the bucket full of chippings. So the monk did, and actually it turned out this bucket that was already full with chippings could actually absorb quite a bit of sand because there's space between these large, pebbly kind of bits of rock, gravel that were in there already. You pour the sand in and it could absorb quite a bit of sand. So Luang Por Du then said, so now is the bucket full? And the monk said, yeah, sure. Oh, it's got gravel, sand, it's completely full to the brim. And Luang Por Du said, go and get some lime, that powdered lime, white powder, fine powder. So the monk brought some. He said, pour it in. So he poured a lot of lime into this bucket, and there was still space to absorb lime. He said, so now is it full? And the monk sort of, he sort of was getting what the point was, but he said, well, yeah, it's full now, sand, lime and gravel. So then Luang Por said, bring some water. And he had him put water in, and it still absorbed more water. By then the monk got the point. He said, we say it's full, but it's not really full, is it? And he was teaching him that the mind is like that. When we're full of ego and self and clinging and craving, then we have this sense, I'm full, there's nothing more to be learned or done or received. And we kind of block off our mind to absorbing the Dhamma or the truth sometimes. So it's quite a creative way to show the monk that. Ajahn Chah used to talk about a monk in the time of the Buddha, Venerable Empty Scripture, who had learned the scriptures and could explain them very well, which is a great thing. It's not something to be disparaged or diminished. He had great learning, great knowledge, and he could teach the Dhamma. He could remember the words of the Buddha and explain the terms and the concepts and very well. And so he also became a very famous teacher with lots of disciples. But one day he realized what he's teaching is not what he's realized. He would sometimes get annoyed with people who didn't listen to him or didn't follow his instructions. Or sometimes he'd notice he was very attached to his position, position of power, prestige, status from being a teacher, and people would come and bring him gifts and make a fuss over him, and he realized sometimes, I'm attached to this, I like it. So if people ignored him or didn't come to the monastery that day, maybe he wasn't so happy. So he finally realized that, and then he went to see the Buddha, and the Buddha said, here comes Venerable, empty scripture. And the monk already had an inkling of what his problem was, and he knew then, the Buddha is putting me down, empty scripture. I know the words, but I can't do the practice yet. I haven't actually realized what I teach. And he'd actually taught many other monks, and some of those monks had become enlightened. So it wasn't like he couldn't do anything or didn't know anything. He'd done a lot of good already, but it wasn't yet perfected. So he went off. And the story goes that he went off to look for a teacher, and he said, I'm just going to walk in one direction to the east, I think, and the first teacher I meet, I'm going to surrender to that teacher, commit myself, and just follow whatever he teaches. I'm going to follow until I get enlightened. As luck would have it, the first kind of little hermitage he came across, he went in and there was a few huts, but nobody was around, and then he heard the sound of sweeping, so he walked further into the hermitage, and it was a little novice monk sweeping leaves. And he said, good afternoon, Venerable. I'm here to give myself to the teacher. I want to practice for enlightenment. Where's the teacher? Because I'm going to commit to this teacher and follow in every instruction he gives me and just practice until I'm enlightened. So where's the teacher? And the novice said, I'm the teacher. As luck would have it, the novice was enlightened and already the teacher. In the time of the Buddha, even young boys could become enlightened. So the monk had no choice but to follow his vow, and so he committed to the novice and said, okay, you're the enlightened teacher, I'll just do whatever you say. And the novice wants to test him, so he says, before I can teach you, I want to see if you're really committed, if you'll really do what I say. He said, yeah, anything, whatever. And the novice says, okay, out the back of the monastery here, I don't know why the many monasteries in the world seem to have a swamp out the back. I've lived in a few, but anyway, on that monastery they had a swamp out the back. And he said, this swamp, we'll go to the edge of the swamp, and now you have to keep walking as fast and as energetically as you can into the swamp, and don't stop until I tell you to. Can you do that? And the monk said, yeah, I think I can do that. So off he started walking, and the novice stood there watching, and he went further and further into the swamp, and it was a swamp with muddy water, quicksand, and he started to sink into the mud and the quicksand, and he was getting lower and lower, and the water, muddy, kind of smelly, muddy swamp water was coming up, and all his fine robes that he brought with him from his previous existence as a important teacher, with people offering him nice robes, they got covered in muddy water, smelly water. But he just kept walking, determined, until it got right up to his chin, the level of the water, and he was almost underwater. Finally the novice said, stop. Okay, you can come back now. So out he came with mud, smelly mud, water, his robes all ruined, wet, soaking, looking sorry for himself. He came out. And the novice said, okay, you proved your commitment, now I'm going to train you. And he gave a meditation object to develop, what we call a barikamma meditation object. A simple word to recite or phrase to recite over and over again to develop mindfulness. And eventually the monk gained samadhi, and eventually he became enlightened and became a great teacher again, but now is an enlightened teacher. So in the practice, it's important for us to know what we know and recognize there are maybe things we don't know yet, so that we can open up to learn more. We need a certain humility and a certain ability to look back at ourselves and recognize sometimes where we are stubborn or proud or just very attached to our knowledge. And these days everybody is very attached to the knowledge they have. There are views and opinions on everything, and maybe they're so attached they also have to tell everyone else. And if it's good quality knowledge, well, that may be a gift. The gift of Dhamma is the greatest gift. But if it's still flawed knowledge, well, not only can we delude ourselves, but we can also delude others. So one of Ajahn Chah's remedies for that was just the reflection that, it's not sure. Even the knowledge you have, the understanding you have in the Dhamma practice, it's not sure. It may be true, it may be correct, but it's not sure. If you bring up that reflection regularly, it's a safety valve, a guard to becoming absolutely stuck in the knowledge you have and your views, becoming complacent or just closed down, rigid, so that you can't absorb more Dhamma, more truth. So learning to contemplate, and particularly contemplate to see the impermanence, the uncertainty of what we know and what we understand, so that we can maybe open up to learn more, is an important part of the practice. And like the Venerable old monk I mentioned earlier, maintaining that ability to contemplate your practice, your understanding, look at it, learn, be willing to learn more, is a vital quality for every practitioner. You're learning how to contemplate and maintain that contemplation, maybe for years and years, that ability to keep coming back and learning from experience, contemplating it, looking at it from different angles, is a valuable, invaluable part of the practice. People sometimes ask, when should I contemplate? Should I just watch the breath in my meditation, or should I contemplate? Well, contemplation really is, if you're looking at the big picture, it should become part of our life, not simply part of meditation. We need to develop the ability to contemplate. Another word for it is wisely reflect, skillfully reflect on things. This is a skill that we're developing throughout our whole life, and drawing on the experience of the Buddha and his teachings, and then other living teachers maybe, drawing on that and then bringing it into our heart and training ourselves in contemplation as well. And we can contemplate everything, can't we? We can contemplate, how we go, if we're a lay person, how we go about earning our living, how we go about spending the money that we do earn, and how we relate to the material world around us. We have to develop wisdom and understanding with that, because that's the foundation of our life. Before you can even meditate, you have to be able to have a certain stability in life. You have to be able to have enough food, place to live, have certain stability in our material needs, and then how we relate to the material world. You have to be able to develop a wise attitude and understanding of how to look after the world that we live in. Look after the place we live, look after the environment, develop some wisdom and understanding towards that. We have to learn how to live in society, gain some stability from that, just to be able to live at peace with our neighbours, work colleagues, or within our family, or wherever we live. So our social relations to society, we have to contemplate. Sometimes we get into disputes with others, and it can be so time-consuming and so emotionally draining that you can't do anything else. Disputes in the family, disputes at work, disputes with other people over all kinds of things like politics or COVID and all kinds of things that we never get to meditate, even because we're just so absorbed into the conflicts and the disputes of the world. So we have to contemplate the material world, our relationships to other people, and then come back and contemplate our own mind and develop some understanding of that. But using the teachings that we gain from the Buddha, if you've got some faith and some interest, the teachings are all there, available to us. So having heard the Dhamma, we bring it in and we start contemplating it. And the Buddha's teachings are always to deal with understanding suffering, stress, how it arises, what its causes are, and what to do about it. And with a goal in mind, you're getting to the end of suffering, the end of stress. And that's something to be realized and experienced. It's not an ideal to just hope for in the future. It's something to experience in the present, in this very life, and even in this very moment. And our contemplation is towards that end. Then another part of our practice is developing the supportive skills internally to support our contemplation, so it really goes in deep and we can really free our mind from suffering. So this is developing the path of mindfulness and right effort, developing samadhi, states of calm. Because the role of samadhi in the Buddhist path is to help bring the mind to a state of calm and stillness so that we can observe the truth about this body, this mind, and the world around us. In other words, to facilitate our practice of contemplation, wise reflection, or insight. So some people ask, when should I contemplate in my practice? Should I develop samadhi first? And well, yes, you can, but often our mind is not yet experiencing samadhi, because that takes, for most people, takes a lot of time and effort to develop. But on the way to developing samadhi, we can contemplate. And sometimes teachers say that's the shortcut to samadhi. Everyone wants samadhi. The shortcut to samadhi is contemplation. When I say contemplation, I mean understanding what are the obstacles and the hindrances towards the peaceful mind, the states of calm, the states of brightness. What are the obstacles, and then finding through contemplation skillful means to overcome them, abandon them. So sometimes when you come to meditate, sitting, walking meditation, your mind is not yet settled, and whatever you do, it seems difficult to bring up mindfulness. Sometimes we need to contemplate first, bring up reflections like the reflection on impermanence, and just observe the impermanent nature of your own thoughts, mental states, feelings, the very things that are, the very experiences we're having that seem to unsettle the mind, agitate the mind, stop it from calming down or being at peace. We bring the perception of impermanence to those experiences and contemplate them. You could say, well, that's just thinking about things, and it's not yet realizing the Dhamma, but it's training the mind to think skillfully, using the power of thought, the ability to bring up ideas, concepts, perceptions, and use them to train ourselves to see things, look at things more closely, and understand different features or different aspects of our own mental activity. So if you're developing the perception of impermanence, it may simply be noting how thoughts arise and pass away from moment to moment. Normally we're getting caught up in the details of what we're thinking about. When we come to meditate, our aim often is, I want a mind that is totally peaceful, blissful, happy. And then straight away we're dealing with all the stories we've picked up from our day, our work, our life, things from the past, sometimes the distant past. Often anxiety, worry about the future, things that haven't even happened yet, but just projecting into the future and worrying about what may or may not happen. And we get caught up into the details of these stories, fueled by different emotional states, and particularly strong feelings of pleasure, hoping for more pleasure, expectation, or getting excited and stimulated by the different kinds of pleasant things we've already achieved and had, or else fear of displeasure, pain, not wanting pain, rejecting pain, not wanting more pain, fear of future pain, and so on. Or bringing up painful memories from the past and just going over them over and over again in our mind. This fills up a lot of the details and the stories of the mind. But when we say contemplation, well, in the beginning that may simply be asking questions, asking ourselves, well, how long do these different stories, the memories, the moods we're experiencing, how long do they last? And some of us fleeting thoughts, mental states, that if you just pause and take a few moments to watch and observe what's going on, you can see them coming up and then passing away again. And just using that perception of impermanence to see, that's gone. What I was just caught into just now, it's now gone. In that moment where I was feeling frustrated with my own mind or the way my body is, it's gone. Noticing the cessation of a particular thought, train of thought, or a feeling, or an emotional state, just noticing how it passes away. If the mind seems to be racing and it's too difficult, well, you can also base your contemplation on what's happened in the past. So if you're used to meditating regularly or just observing your mind regularly, not necessarily even in meditation, you can observe different moods and thoughts arising, passing away, and say, well, this happened this morning, didn't it? This morning I was feeling excited as I got up. I can remember that because it's only this morning, it's fresh in my memory. I was off to do something maybe, and I can remember how excited or stimulated I felt by that experience. But now we've reached the afternoon, that experience is gone. I feel totally different now. But just by holding attention and contemplating your own experience, you might be able to accept and agree with yourself that, oh yeah, this morning's mood has changed now, or even just how I was feeling before I came to meditate or before this moment has changed already. Learning to contemplate how you feel, what you're thinking about, especially if you're during periods of your day when you don't have a lot of other things to do and you have the luxury of a bit of free time. Learning to do that and just contemplate in the sense of coming to a deeper understanding of what you're actually experiencing. Over time, if you do that, and one thing you notice is a lot of the moods and thoughts you're experiencing are not that important because they just arise, pass away, and you never think about them again. They really don't seem to matter that much. Whereas when we haven't trained much in observation, contemplation, and we're maybe not so mindful, Our tendency is to believe everything and get stuck on those experiences and believe every thought, every feeling, especially over time. If we're not that aware of what's going on, we can find ourselves into states of stress and suffering very easily. So the Buddha encouraged us to particularly develop the quality of just knowing things that are arising, pass away, and develop this quality of equanimity. Just knowing things without judging and without getting caught up into the states of mind that we experience. And part of that equanimity, that sense of balance and just knowing things, comes through contemplation. Seeing things, recognizing things as impermanent, seeing the suffering when you grasp hold of every thought, every feeling, every sensation with this sense of self. It tends to lead on to more proliferation and more agitation. Whereas if you have developed this quality of just knowing experience, observing, knowing, then you can let things arise and pass away without getting so caught into them. They say, like somebody on a boat on the ocean. You know, if your boat is a seaworthy boat, and then the waves come, you rise up and down with the wave, but you don't get sunk by the waves. Even big waves, you can ride over them. You're keeping your boat afloat. It's like somebody who's learning to contemplate their experience. Your aim is to keep the mind afloat, keep it observing, mindful, and contemplating experience rather than getting caught back up into the experience, being dragged under the waves rather than riding on top of them. And this is a practice. We have to keep developing this skill through our day, developing more mindfulness and then observing back at our own feelings and this sense of self that seems so important when it's there in the mind and takes over. This thought, I know, I am, I'm here because I know, and I can remember that I'm here, and I have all these memories and thoughts that seem to back up this view that I am here, I'm a solid person. Maybe I'm an important person, or maybe I'm an unimportant person, all backed up by this sense of self that we keep reinforcing. When you bring up this awareness and start contemplating, you're questioning that. How true is it? How solid is it? How permanent is it? This is the way we can free ourselves from a lot of stress very quickly and calm the mind down very quickly by just questioning things, putting them on one side, looking at them from different angles and saying, well, how real is this? Is this something I really have to hold on to? Or can I just know it and let it go and keep the mind afloat that way, keep it rising above experience? This is bringing what we've studied and heard from the practice inside, observing it on the inside. So in the beginning we have to do a fair amount of comparing notes with what we have heard and remembered, but then looking and see, is it true what the Buddha said? Is it true? Are these thoughts, feelings, mental states, memories, are they really permanent? And as you contemplate, you almost certainly will notice, well, they're not. And when the mind notices that, there's a little moment of liberation or cessation, nirodha, the third noble truth. You've seen something as arising, passing away, and then you let go, and your mind is liberated from that thought. What's left is a slightly purer, better kind of knowledge. It doesn't mean to say the memory is completely gone, but the grasping at it as a self has gone for that moment. If we keep contemplating in this way, maybe saying, oh, this is not sure, this is not self, this is not sure, then the mind is getting into the habit of contemplating and letting go of where it normally attaches. letting go of clinging and attachment as an experience, as a realization, realizing the Dhamma as opposed to just talking about it, believing in it, thinking it, but actually knowing it directly from experience. We can bring up simple techniques like the thoughts that you start to observe in your mind, your thoughts about yourself, others, more negative thoughts, more positive thoughts, observing them. Sometimes we have to deliberately think them through in our mind. This is a thought. I like this. Why do I like this? I don't like that. Why do I not like that? You're thinking things through in a very deliberate way as a form of contemplation, but becoming very aware of the impermanent, changing nature of thoughts and the feelings that come with them. Noticing how with the more negative thoughts, they don't lead on to a feeling of contentment or well-being. They tend to make us feel more anxious, more agitated, more unhappy within ourselves, more unpleasant feelings. But this practice of contemplation tends to make the mind feel more steady, more calm, observing and realizing the impermanence of your own thoughts and memories brings with it pleasant feeling, sense of well-being. I know that. It's just like that. A thought is just a thought. It rises, passes away. And having done this for a while, the mind starts to get the point. So when new views and opinions, beliefs come into the mind, you can apply the same wisdom, the same contemplation technique that you've done before, because it's worked before and it's brought your mind to a sense of letting go, cessation, sense of peace. Well, it can work again. And sometimes maybe even you keep applying the same technique, just contemplating over and over again, might bring you to the point where the mind is free, at least for a while. It's just totally free. The mind, it doesn't want to cling on to any thought formations anymore. Sometimes they say this is the empty mind, but still there's something there. It's just the quality of knowing. It's empty of the sense of self which forms around the knowing, the belief. And it's free and it's peaceful. It's brighter, happier, content. We get a little understanding of what the empty mind is like, the mind that is free from self, free from suffering, free from clinging. And that experience can grow through practice. So it's not that what we've learned, what we've heard is wrong. It's just it has a purpose, and the purpose is to stimulate further contemplation and investigation of our experience, questioning things so that we bring the mind to actually realize impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, these three characteristics. And if you train in that more, then they become perceptions that you're bringing up all the time. Quite naturally you're noticing things and your mind is more prepared, say, for all the changes that life brings. So at the moment we have all the changes of the COVID world, into lockdown, out of lockdown, can travel, can't travel, can go to school, can't go to school, go to work, can't go to work, can do this, can't do that. It's changing all the time very quickly. But if you keep contemplating, then you gain a certain experience with change and knowing how to understand change as it's affecting you, rather than always just reacting with fear or frustration or anger. And then that becomes another contemplation. When you contemplate the liberating effect of contemplation, you contemplate back on what you've done and achieved and how well it's gone, then that can inspire you and motivate you to contemplate further. You might say, if you've ever achieved some success in letting go of a particular mood you were holding on to, you had some frustration with something in your life, with your own efforts in your work or in your social life, or the frustrations of the changing situation with, say, your work or COVID, and you manage to let go of that in the past, and you can draw on that experience again and again and again. You can say, oh, I've managed to let go of this before. There have been times when I've been angry, fed up, but I managed to get through it. Then you can apply that same wisdom again and look for the way. When you've been, totally fed up with something, or maybe feeling a failure, or you maybe did fail at something, you made a mistake and failed at something, and previously you would carry that around, but then coming to recognize, well, it's just another feeling, it's just another thought that can be seen as impermanent and let go of, and you've done it before, so the next time you meet with some failure or make a mistake, you can do the same thing again. And we gradually learn like this, learn how to raise our mind back up, like get back in the boat rather than sinking into the ocean or being swallowed up by the ocean of attachment. Getting back in the boat and riding above these things. And you may still be making mistakes from time to time or going through unpleasant experiences, but recognizing that part of the mind can see and contemplate them as impermanent, not self, and let go. And the more we do that, then a little bit of that contemplation stays, some of the wisdom stays, and then it's ready. It maybe even comes up quite naturally when you're faced with you've made your mistake, or you've done something and it's led to some frustrating, unpleasant situation. Quite naturally the mind might say, well, this too will pass, this is impermanent. And you know it because you've seen it before. It's not just a theory or the words someone else tells you, it's actually your own mind saying, oh, this is impermanent, this can be abandoned. Much of the practice is learning how to do this, how to keep the mind afloat, we say in a wholesome state. Even if we haven't yet developed deep states of samadhi, we may still aim for that, but actually our real aim is to develop wisdom and understanding, to be able to contemplate our experience and not to create suffering and attachment which leads to suffering out of our experience, to know it as it is. Sometimes the word Ajahn Chah would use is not give too much importance to an experience, to know it, so you're not deluding yourself or denying something, but not give it so much importance. That's just the way it is. Truly seeing the impermanent nature of experience. Because ultimately, what do you take with you in this world, in this life, from one moment to the next and to the very end of your life? The thing that really lasts through that is the wisdom and the knowledge that comes through the practice of knowing and experiencing impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness of things, and the lack of self, that we don't really own the experience of this body, this mind, the world. That knowledge is what we carry through our life and keeps the mind more peaceful. But we have to support that ability to contemplate and see things as they are. We have to train in wisdom, keep looking, keep learning from our experience. That also requires a lot of patience, because we tend to give up, don't we? We give up when we encounter difficulty. We want to give up. Can't be bothered to contemplate. It's too tiring, too frustrating. Can't be bothered to apply the Dhamma or find the Dhamma in experience. We just tend to go back to our emotions, and more often than not, they're negative. And we tend to fall back down to the negative emotions all the time. And it can be quite hard work bringing the mind back up again, but we have no choice. Noticing the difference between the mind that is seeing impermanence and the mind that is clinging on with a sense of self, wanting something to last or believing it will last. If you're feeling frustrated, believing that you are frustrated or you are depressed or you are failed or your life has, things have gone badly wrong, believing that is not a peaceful state of mind. But having seen that kind of mental state as impermanent, you can see the peace, you can experience a little bit of peace. Keep coming back to that, and when you can see impermanence, you can see there's peace behind that. And how many times, you can count, how many times in your day have you felt frustrated or been angry? Say, since this morning, hopefully none at all, but there are probably moments, or at least micro moments of displeasure, dissatisfaction come into your mind. Driving a car, doing a job of work, cleaning your house, maybe just getting up in the morning, oh, my body hurts or it's cold. Bringing up more awareness and contemplating that, and then later on just observing back and see how many moments have arisen and passed away. And you're changing your perception of them, aren't you? You're saying, okay, sometimes I get displeasure, dissatisfaction, even full-on anger, but it arises and passes away. And you look back and you see them. Then you can see that in one day, maybe looking back over the last weeks, months, years, could even say since you were born, as an exercise, just sit down and say, since I was born, how many times have I become angry or despairing, distressed? Where are all those moments now? They've gone. Thankfully, they didn't last. Even that simple question and answering it yourself is a form of contemplation, isn't it? Contemplating the impermanent nature of your moods, mental formations. This is unwrapping the banana plant. The Buddha compared mental formations, thought formations that we follow and attach to as like a banana plant that's just made up of endless rounds of flesh. If you cut into it, you can't find anything solid. There's nothing there. Or you could say an onion, if you want something more nearer to hand. You cut an onion, there's rings and rings and rings, but in the middle there's nothing there. So sometimes we contemplate on past experience. You might say, well, I'm not very mindful, but you can base your wisdom on what's happened before to teach yourself, and that's preparing you for what's to come. So if you've investigated these rings of the onion and realised, well, actually inside there's nothing there, it's just a thought arising, passing away, accompanied by feelings, sometimes unpleasant feelings, unpleasant situations, okay, but where are they now? They've all gone. They arose, they passed away, and that was it. If you're really depressed, you'll probably say, well, they're going to arise and pass away in the future. If you're more pessimistic, the glass is half empty, the glass is completely empty. My life is just doomed, destined to more lockdowns, more COVID, more problems, no money, no fun. Well, if that's the way you're looking at it, just go back to the past for a moment and say, yeah, but those thoughts, they rise, they pass away, and there are other experiences in between. There's periods where the mind is quite calm, periods where it's even quite happy and blissful even, enjoying things. If we're honest and we contemplate in this way, we say, all these different states, they arise, they pass away. That's the one thing they have in common. Rather than always attaching to the pleasure and the happiness and hating the pain, hating the unpleasant experiences, contemplating like this, you see, in one sense they all have the same value. It doesn't mean to say you can't have any pleasure in life, but just observe how it arises and passes away, and you can't hold on to it. But in the same way, despair, depression, anguish arises and passes away. It's not the whole story, it's not really who you are. So contemplating the changing nature of your mental states, the changing nature of this body. It's never fully comfortable, we're always changing posture, it's never fully at ease. It's never without a few aches and pains around the corner. But at the same time it does also bring pleasure, and there are times when we experience pleasure, but it's changing. It's a conditioned thing. Becoming more aware of the process of body and mind, how it's a conditioned thing depending on what's coming up. It's what we experience, through our eyes, ears, touch, smell, taste, and also in the mind itself. This is old karma coming back to us. Some people will get stuck in the view that it's all just from past life. Past life I must have done so many bad things that this life I just have all these problems, and COVID is my karma. The fact I'm living in a world full of COVID, it's my bad karma from last life. I must have done so many unwholesome things. But that's only one factor, the past. More important is what you're doing in the present moment with your life right now. Again, this is where we have to contemplate. Contemplating the state of mind with some mindfulness, bringing up mindfulness with wisdom, is about the most wholesome thing you can do in the present. One monk used to say it's like when you get a candle in the jungle when you're in the tropics, say in Thailand or somewhere, and if you have a candle at night and it's not covered by glass or cloth or anything, unfortunately what happens is it attracts all the insects, and every insect is just blindly attracted to the flame, and it will fly into the flame and die. So often monks will put out the candle because they just feel so sorry for the insects. But if the candle is on for whatever reason, it's lit, you just get wave after wave of insects flying into the candle and dying. This is like all the different sense impressions, mental impressions, thoughts, memories, feelings that come into the mind, come into our experience. When we're contemplating the impermanence of them, they just die just there. They arise, they pass away. When we don't contemplate, well, we take up everything as self. We become happy, we become sad, we become angry, and the mind is full of agitation, and this just conditions more of the same. But bringing up the reflection on the impermanent nature of these things, we're seeing the process, and we can step back or ride above, you might say, rise above the process. Getting back into the boat, riding on the surface of the ocean. And that's where real peace is. Even if we haven't developed a lot of samadhi or skills in meditation, we can contemplate this. Every day we have the opportunity to observe the arising and passing away of moods and thoughts. So they say, one who sees impermanence sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. If you can see the impermanent nature of your own mental experience, this body and mind, then you're getting closer to the Buddha, closer to liberation. So maybe I'll leave this talk as an offering to you tonight, and we'll finish there.